So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Another beautiful day, right? Another beautiful day to wake up alive. Every day we wake up alive, it's like another miraculous gift. The gift of life is a miracle. We wake up in the morning and we get to experience a miracle every day. That's quite a thing, isn't it? Let's take 1 minute, greet your neighbors, shake some hands. Husbands, kiss your wives. Say good morning. You have to.
I was doing that anyway.
Nice. Good to see you. Al, always good to see you, buddy.
Good morning.
You're back. Good. Hi, good to see you. Hi, Jim. Good morning, Cheryl. Nice to see you. Hey.
Good morning. I already did you.
Hi. Hey, David. Good to see you. How you guys doing? The wild bunch here, huh? Yeah. Good to see you. Kyle. So, I want to welcome some special guests with us today. Our speaker is back again, Dr. Bill Stork. And then there's Sheila and Ned and Sarah. Sheila is his wife. Ned and Sarah are guests as well. Hey, let's give a hand to Sheila and Ned and Sarah, too. So, really back by popular demand. We loved Bill so much last year. He's back again, so that's great. And he readily accepts our invitation with enthusiasm, so we really appreciate that. Bill is an accomplished veterinarian, a columnist, an author, and an accomplished speaker, and an observer of life. You'll find that out when he speaks to us. And I was rereading one of his stories from one of his books. It's I Have Never Worked is the name of the book, and it's a collection of his stories. And I want to share a nugget from one of those chapters. It's called Life Without Art. And here's a quote from Life Without Art. Without art, life as we know it would cease to exist. The dictionary definition of art is skill acquired by experience, study, or observation. Thus, there is an art in backhoe operators, welders, and HVAC technicians. There is an art to sales, conversation, and making friends, unquote. Wise observation, wouldn't you agree? So I think there's an art to the way my mother raised me, to value self-reliance and personal responsibility. And my wife knows there's an art to managing her husband, and vice versa. So without life, truly, without art, life would cease to exist as we know it. So I think those are wise words. You lost your fire, huh? Okay, good job. Thank you, Karen. That was beautiful. Here's one I came across. A pastor was giving a children's sermon on vestments, and he asked the kids, "Why do you think I wear this collar?" And one observant, thinking young man in the first row said, "Because it kills fleas and ticks for up to 30 days. Smart kid. So let's stand and sing together our opening song. Let us share the word from your bulletins. Have you not known, have you not heard, the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth.
He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable.
He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Join together and let us pray. Lord, you are my good shepherd. In you I lack nothing. You make me lie down in quiet green pastures and lead me beside still waters. You restore my hungry, thirsty soul. Jesus, lead me in paths of righteousness for your name's sake, that I may dwell in your house my whole life long. Amen. And now if you'll grab that insert in your bulletins, and we'll sing together, As the Deer. Now let us affirm our faith with the Apostles' Creed. I believe Now Katie Ullman will come and share the scripture.
He makes springs pour water into the ravines. It flows between the mountains. They give water to all the beasts of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. The birds of the air nest by the waters. They sing among the branches. He waters the mountains from his upper chambers. The earth is satisfied by the fruit of his work. He makes grass grow for the cattle and plants for man to cultivate, bringing forth food from the earth. Wine that gladdens the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread that sustains his heart. The trees of the Lord are well watered, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. There the birds make their nests. The stork has its home in the pine trees. The high mountains belong to the wild goats. The crags are a refuge for the conies. The moon marks off the seasons, and the sun knows when to go down. You bring darkness, it becomes night, and the beasts of the forest prowl. The lions roar for their prey and seek their food from God. The sun rises, and they steal away. They return and lie down in their dens. Then man goes out to his work, to his labor until evening. How many are your works, O Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. There is sea vast and spacious, teeming with creatures beyond number.
Thank you, Katie. And now I'll invite Bill Stork to the front, and he'll share his wisdom. The more I get to know Bill, the more I think we are kindred spirits. We have the same appreciation, I think, of the outdoors and music and life maybe in general, and exercise and humor. And I know we both spent significant times on the south end of northbound cattle in our careers. And you have to have a pretty good sense of humor when you do that. So anyway, Bill Stork. He says I'm not going to hold him to wisdom. A little switch on top there. You're good to go.
All right. All right. Hopefully y'all can hear me. So first of all, it is not my nature to correct somebody, especially when that person has offered to feed us lunch. But there is some degree of relevance to this, because John said that my last book is called I Have Never Worked, which is relative, but the title of the book is I Have Never Failed. But I have extensive experience with things that absolutely positively do not work, which is and I wrestled with the title of that book for a good long time, but it is something that I believe very firmly in, and that is that if you're doing the best that you can with what you have, where you are at any particular time, you cannot fail, but you can learn what doesn't work. John also said that he started off by saying today is a miracle because we woke up and we are alive. And my last story is dedicated to someone who is no longer alive. And my last story is about someone who has altered every day of my life since the day I met him. And as such, I work really hard to live in moments and to capture those moments. And one of which was, Ned and I were talking about this in the parking lot, and I can't find a really good segue for this, so I'll keep it brief and I'll just move on from there. But in the year of the Super Bowl of the Rona, there was a couple of commercials during that Super Bowl. One was Mom and Dad and the family show up at Grandma and Grandpa's house, and Grandma and Grandpa had airport security set up on the sidewalk. And as they started into the house, Grandma and Grandpa stripped them of all their devices, their phones, their tablets, and that was a nice, funny commercial. But there was a companion commercial to that I have captured since the moment I saw it, and it just sat me up straight. Dinner table, Mom on one side, Dad on the other side, and the kids sitting at the bottom of the table, and the whole set was kind of this maudlin sepia tone. And the kid looks up at his mom, and he says, "Hey, Mom, I was wondering, after school, maybe we can bake some brownies or something like that." Mom's got herself buried on her cell phone. And he looks over at his dad, and he says, "Hey, Dad, maybe after school, we can go fishing or play some ball or something." And Dad's buried on his cell phone. In that book that John is talking about, I wrote a chapter called Break My Mind about our dependence on these god-awful electronic pacifiers. And I worked really hard to capture that moment and not be one of those parents. So, as I said, I don't really have a segue for that, so we'll get started. John and I are, as veterinarians, John to a lesser extent because he spent quite a bit of time in the country. I have now started to spend most of my time in the clinic as a companion animal veterinarian. And as such, almost every euthanasia I have been a part of, at some point in time, somebody will say, "God, I could never be a veterinarian. My daughter was going to be a veterinarian because I could never stand to put animals to sleep." And I can positively assure you that at no point in time have I ever woken up in the morning and said, "Man, I can't wait to go put a dog to sleep today." But what I can tell you is that at those moments, I have experienced some of the most unbelievable moments of humanity, and in the story I'm about to tell you, faith as well. And this is a story about a family called the Wilsons, Don and Becky, Brett and Aaron. You may immediately pick up on the notion that I have changed the names to protect the family, which is a little less of an issue because we're far away from where they live. But the Wilsons had this beautiful little Cocker Spaniel dog named Sally. And Sally was your typical Cocker Spaniel. She had the droopy ears and the goopy eyes, and she had a grade 3 heart murmur. But this dog had the disposition of a little old nanny. She would follow the boys, Brett and Aaron, to the bus stop every morning. She'd be waiting for them at the bus when they got home. If they went down to the lake to go fishing, if they played ball, there was Sally all day long. As a matter of fact, Becky used to make Sally's veterinary appointments around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon after the boys got out of school. And I remember the boys would be sitting on the bench in the exam room, and I'd scoop the dog up and I'd put her on the exam room table and I'd be checking her out. And they would raise their hand if they had a question. "Hey, Mr. Vet Guy, is Sally gonna die?" "No, guys, Sally is just fine." And one day at their visit, we used to keep a collection of James Herriot's children's stories. And I would buy that book by the case, and in certain families, I would send one of those books home. And I sent one home with the Wilsons, and I told Becky, I said, "Man, you may need a box of Kleenexes because a few of these are real tearjerkers." But it was Bill who needed the box of Kleenexes because 3 days later, I received a handwritten thank you note from the boys. Now, Becky was a teller at Farmers and Merchants Bank in town, but she was also the perpetual den mother, homeroom mother. She baked brownies. She was always there for her kids. Don was a maintenance man at a factory in town, but he also did odd jobs for $20 an hour. And as proof that class knows no dollar signs, it still looks exactly, their home looks exactly like it did the day I wrote this story. It would make Sanford and Son look like the Biltmore Hotel. Don had yet to finish the siding, so there was kind of Tyvek, and the house was partially sided. There were lawnmowers minus their gas tanks because Don had parted them out for an odd job. There were wheelbarrows minus their wheels because he'd borrowed them for somebody else. Grass was growing up all over the place. But when you called that family with blood work results or to make an appointment, the boys would answer the phone. Wilson's residence, can I help you, please? They went to school, and yeah, their clothes might have been patched, their clothes might have been secondhand, but they were always clean. The first sign that something was wrong was when Don drove Becky to their veterinary appointment. And it wasn't long after that came this red bandana tied around Becky's hair, and the color started to fade from her face, and the flesh started to melt from her cheeks. She hung on at the bank for as long as she could, and I still remember, I'd walk into that bank, and she'd say, Bill, how are your kids? How are Paige and Calvin? She never missed one of the boys' football games, but I remember one September opener, she was down at the end of the bleachers wrapped up in a pile of blankets, and it was 75 degrees outside. Now, Mother Teresa said, blessed are the sick, and I'm pretty sure she was talking about Becky Wilson, because as she started to fade, she and Don would speak openly to the boys about what life was going to be like without her. And as she no longer could, she taught the boys how to cook and how to clean and how to do laundry. What she would not allow those boys to do is turn in a homework assignment late or be late for practice. But when practice was over, they got back home and they helped Mom as best they could. Now, the great Wisconsin author Michael Perry says the real pain starts when you return the last casserole dish. For Bill, the pain was at Becky's wake when I walked through the line and I shook hands with Don and I gave him a hug, and I looked past Don and I could see the chair that Sally and Becky used to sit and look down at the lake. Now, I would like to think at the Lake Mills Veterinary Clinic we do our dead level best for every patient that walks through our door, but there are certain cases where you pull out all the stops, and we removed every rotten tooth, we removed every lump, we managed Sally's congestive heart failure with the top shelf drugs, and Don never saw an invoice. He would help me change some ballasts in the light fixtures, he'd paint an exam room. We never charged him a nickel, but if we were going to dignify this woman that we had lost, we could not let that dog suffer. And finally, at what would be Sally's second to the last visit to the clinic, it was very clear that her time had come. And I couldn't speak. And I turned to go to the pharmacy to get the drugs I needed to put that dog to sleep. And Don said, Bill, I want to take her home for one last night. I said, Don, I don't think she's going to make it through the night. And he said, yeah, I know. There's a man that knew loss, and he was going to be just fine. Well, she made it through the night. I met him at the clinic at 6:30 the next morning, and we put the dog to sleep, and everybody in the room knew what it was all about, and we all cried like babies. A couple of months later, Don was on the fence at Brett's last high school football game, and I pulled up next to him, and he turned to me and he said, Bill, did I ever tell you about Sally's last night? And I said, no, what happened? And he said, well, about 3 o'clock in the morning, he tried to wake up and get out of bed. And he was nauseous and disoriented and fell to the floor and vomited all over the floor. And he crawled into the kitchen. And Brett came out of their bedroom with his brother Aaron in a fireman's carry. And they staggered out into the front yard. The pilot light in their stove had blown out. I said, Don, how in the heck did you guys wake up? And he said, it was Sally. She was sitting on her butt, staring at the stove, barking and braying like a blue-tick hound with a coon up a tree. Now, you can call this mojo, you can call it good luck, you can call it whatever you want. I call it a couple of things. I call it Becky Wilson looking down on her boys one last time. And in those inevitable times when I start questioning, that is one of my stories, one of my signs of absolute affirmation, because I can't explain it any other way. So there's my story on faith. And I think that one of the other, John actually referred to being self-reliant, which is another version of resilience. And I think resilience, as well as faith, is one of the most valuable tools that we can have in our toolbox to get us through. To the extent that sometimes I think they're interchangeable and one builds on the other. And a couple of my favorite stories about resilience are about being out in Colorado and climbing this mountain on my bicycle that I never thought that I could be able to climb. I'm not going to tell you that story because, one, poor Ned and Sarah and my wife have had to sit through that story about a half a dozen times. And the other reason why I'm not going to, what? Yes, sir.
We'll release the Sunday school children.
Oh, excellent, okay.
This is the time our Sunday school students will take off along with their teachers. Let's raise our hands and blessings to these miraculous gifts of children. Learn a whole bunch in Sunday school.
Well, I thought I was getting the curtain before I ever got really started. Usually it's my wife that gives me the wrap it up in a hurry. But anyway, I have these stories about climbing mountains on my bicycle and bicycle racing, and they are stories about resilience, and sure enough, they are an application of resilience. But not so long ago, I started to wonder where that may have come from. And I had a conversation with a really good friend of mine recently. My kids are 25 and 27 years of age. But my friend Mike, his kids were still in school. And we would come together and we started talking about kids these days. Old enough to have conversations, kids these days. And we were talking about schools and their policies towards leniency, in which case kids can turn things in late and they can retake tests and they don't take final exams. And we were talking about pay-for-play sports. And pay-for-play sports are absolutely relentless. They practice every night of the week, and they have games and tournaments on weekends. And Mike's kids played basketball and volleyball. My kids played hockey. These sports are absolutely relentless, and we lamented the effect that they have on families and family time together. And we parted with the notion that, we just want our kids to have experiences that we didn't have access to when we were kids. And as they rolled on down our driveway and headed back to Illinois, I kept on thinking about this. Now, make no mistakes, if pay-for-play sports were a thing in the mid-'70s, my dad could have donated a private jet to the team, and I still would have been the third-string right fielder on the baseball team. So that was absolutely not an option. But what I do remember is time around the dinner table with my family. And there were a number, but one in particular. I came home from school on a Thursday night, and I had gotten a date with Jerry Brossart. Now, 6'3", 165 pounds, chef salad, red hair, and overbite. Jerry Brossart was a ballet dancer. Oh, she was beautiful and she was elegant. So I asked my dad, can I borrow the Brown Bomber on Saturday night? The Brown Bomber was a 1975 3/4 ton Ford with a 464 barrel, had California turbo muffler. She idled like a thunderstorm in the distance. Brown metal flake paint, and she had mag wheels. I needed all the mojo I could get. Now, to this day, I'm 100% confident my dad was sitting there thinking, how in the heck did Pencil Neck get a date with somebody like Jerry Rosser? But his response was instant. He said, oh, heck yeah, you can borrow the truck as soon as it's empty. And being here in central Wisconsin, you guys know this, where this is going immediately. So 5 o'clock Saturday morning, the knock comes on the door. Mom already had breakfast on the table. Dad had the brown bomber hooked up to our 23-foot wood hauling trailer. Yeah, well, my dad, on his way home from work one day, had ran across a mobile home that had been hit by a tornado. The front end was twisted one direction, the back end was twisted the other direction. Dad and I pulled up with a cutting torch and cut both ends off and made a wood hauling trailer. Now, our friend Jim had a farm just south of town, and Dad and I would cut the trees that hung over his cornfield. And I had been cutting firewood with my dad since I was old enough to hold a hatchet. You know, Dad would instruct me on how to take off all the small branches and stack the brush so it would burn nice and tightly and drag everything away from his feet while he was running the chainsaw. To this day, 45 years later, I remember the moment when Dad tapped me on the shoulder and put that chainsaw in my hand. And on this event, at 17 years of age, Dad and I would trade off with every tank of fuel. I would cut, and he would drag and stack, and then we'd go back and forth. And by noon, we had the brown bomber squat, and both the truck and the trailer were full of wood. So Dad sat in the passenger seat, and I drove out of the holler, and we went to Dalton City, Illinois, 18 grain bins and the Shamrock Pub. The self-proclaimed ugliest bartender and the best cheeseburgers you've ever had in your life. And we parked that truck right out in front. So everybody knew we'd been hard at it. And we went home that day, and of course, I cleaned out the back of the truck, and I was just about getting a little weak in the knees, and Dad says, you know, son, why don't you go get ready for your date? That trailer, you can empty that out tomorrow. Now, went to college, but I would go back and I would help Dad cut firewood. As a matter of fact, my freshman year, I was bent on showing the old man that I still had it, and I promptly proceeded to forget the first rule of felling a tree. I didn't kick out the notch before I knocked the tree down, and a small town doctor put 48 stitches in my left knee to remind me of that rule. So I went to college and I got into veterinary school, but I can tell these stories because none of y'all are my clients. I was number 13 on the waiting list to get into veterinary school. I just dove in under the wire. Had to repeat my freshman year, made it out of my sophomore year of vet school by about 3 points. Got married once, that worked out well enough to have a couple of kids, but then in the end, that did not work out all that well either. But all these years later, here I stand at the top of the hill. My kids are both productive and kind at our veterinary clinic. I get to go to work every day with 14 professionals, and together we get to help 4,500 clients and their patients. And I am married to the finest human that I've ever met. And none of that would have happened without some measure of resilience. And when I think back, gosh, where did that come from? And I'm pretty confident it all got started on the end of that hatchet with my dad. Now, I told this story, or a version of this story, in Madison here a while back, and I should have had enough sense to stop. But I didn't. And I circled back and I said, you know, we live in a time, and this started, I almost got drugged out of a parent-teacher conference when I found out that kids are allowed to turn assignments in late, retake tests with no penalty. There's been talk of eliminating final exams. Down in Chicago, they're looking at eliminating Fs and eliminating homework. And then we stand around and we wonder, John and I were talking about this yesterday, pick your profession from hospitality to plumbers and electricians and pipe fitters and veterinarians. Can't get people to show up for interviews, can't get people to show up for work, and we can't get veterinary students, can't make it to a 9 o'clock test on time. And we wonder if there might be a connection between the two of those things. Now, I had a professor in veterinary school, Dr. Stanley Curtis, who opined that life without stress is death. The father of positive psychology is a man named Dr. Marty Seligman. And Dr. Marty Seligman says that you deprive kids the opportunity to fail, you deprive them the opportunity to grow. When that knock came on my door at 5 o'clock that morning, "Oh, I'm too tired" was no kind of option, I absolutely guarantee you. So I called up my buddy Mike, and I said, "You know, Mike, yeah, we want our kids to have experiences that we did not have access to, but we also want our kids to have experiences that we did have." So there's a story on faith, there's a story on resilience. As I said, I think they're fairly interconnected. And there's nothing I believe in more than family. But I also alluded to people in my life who have affected me. And somewhere in one of the books that I wrote in the dedications, I said something to the effect of, there are people who come into our lives at a time where they bring an energy, they bring a spirit, they bring a perspective that affects every day from that day forward. And one of those people is a man called the amazing Dick Bass. And this is a story that I dearly love because this is a man that I dearly love. And Dick Bass is a nerd. And I read an article in the Wall Street Journal last week that the Georgia accent is starting to fade. Well, I have news for you. The Georgia accent was not lost on the amazing Dick Bass. Dick Bass would eventually get a PhD in electrical engineering. He grew up on an onion farm in Blackshear, Georgia. Pick your stereotype. Taped up glasses, check. Pocket protector, absolutely. Button-up shirt, one tail tucked in, that was Dick Bass. He wore khakis when he played basketball. So Dick Bass and I came together. I was just getting started in veterinary school. He was working on his PhD. And Dick Bass always loved Kermit the Frog. He envied Kermit the Frog. He says, "You know, Billy Stork, the thing about Kermit the Frog is he could sit right there on that lily pad, pick his guitar and sing, and he never fell in the water." And Dick Bass and I would go for donuts every Saturday morning at 6 o'clock. Now, that we went to the Yield Donut Shop, the coffee, they had been using the same filter, I swear, since the Nixon administration. The donuts were like outdated paper towel. It was god-awful. But the company was absolutely awesome. There was an old retired plumber in there named Bernie. We would debate the merits of the Andy Griffith Show. There was a retired asphalt foreman named Porter Keyes. This man was the picture of elegance, suit and tie, and his shoes were polished to go to a donut shop on a Saturday morning. And one day we were walking home from Yale Donut Shop, and we happened upon a yard sale, and Dick started rummaging around, and he moved an old blender and an ab roller, and he picked up this mandolin that had been spray painted black. The neck was broken, the body was hanging from 4 rusty strings. He gave that woman a $5 bill, and he tucked it up under his arm like it had been played by Bill Monroe himself. And we got about halfway home, and I said, "Dick Bass, do you know anything about playing mandolin?" He said, "No, Billy Stork, but you know, when folks get together down home to play bluegrass and gospel music, we always need a mandolin player." So that thing hung in the breezeway next to my barn coat for months. And eventually it came down, and the strings came off, and the neck got glued back together, and eventually he started to pick it up. Now, the amazing Dick Bass played guitar and banjo and piano, and he sang. His PhD work would eventually be applied to adaptive devices for veterans and amputees. But the thing that made this man special, the thing that earned him the moniker, the amazing Dick Bass, is he made every minute of every day and everybody he ever met special. Tuesdays, University of Illinois, IEEE department. He would gather the entire department. They would lock arms and high kick and sing their way to a soda break. I'm a pepper, he's a pepper, she's a pepper, we're all peppers. On Thursdays, we would have, in the midst of vet school and PhD, Dick Bass and I would have big old family dinners. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, fried chickens, turkey, you name it. One come all. And when we got done eating, we'd go out on the front porch and we'd have sing-alongs at the big square gray house until there's a slow-moving car would come by. And then Dick Bass would put down his guitar and he would chase that car all the way to the corner. And somebody said, well, Dick Bass, why do you chase cars? He said, you know, down home on the farm, we had this old hound dog. And he would see a car go by and he would chase it all the way down to the hard road. And he said, dog would always be trotting back, had a big old grin on his face. He said, one day I tried it. He said, the dog was right. So the last weekend before fall semester started, we would invite everybody to the lake to eat crawfish etouffee and go water skiing. And Dick Bass and some others and I would get there a little bit early, and we would ski on Friday night. As a matter of fact, one weekend in particular, Dick Bass was trying to learn how to slalom ski, and he picked up one ski, dropped the tip, and it kicked back up and cut him on the back of the head. Well, thankfully, we were a long way from a doctor's office, but I had just started junior surgery, and I had a neuter pack and some 2/0 nylon. So we were able to part his red hair and stitch him back together enough that we could keep water skiing, bandage his head out. So we would get on the lake at sunrise on Saturday morning, and this boat had a 4-cylinder Chevy in it, and it had a loud lifter on the 4-cylinder. And Dick Bass would sit back there with his banjo, just ticking on that little inboard underpowered boat, playing Foggy Mountain Breakdown as we water ski across the lake. So people started to show up, and the boat started to get full, so I took Dick Bass, his banjo, some swim floats, and dropped him off at the beach. Picked up the other people, and hours later, I was starting to think, oh my goodness, Dick's going to think we forgot about him. And when we went back to the beach, it was like this armada. There were houseboats and pontoons boats and ski boats. Everybody was out on the bow of their boats just picking and singing and carrying on. In the middle of it all, laid back on an inner tube and a swim float with his banjo, with head bandaged up like Johnny Comes Marching Home, is the amazing Dick Bass. And when I made my way through the crowd of boats, he looks up at me and he smiled with his whole head and he said, you know what, Billy the Stork? Kermit the Frog ain't got nothing on me today. When Dick Bass defended his PhD thesis, he attracted General Electric and the United States Military Veterans Administration. And halfway through his PhD defense, he started getting a little tired. Man, I'm getting tired in the head. And he pulled up mimeographs of green eggs and ham, and he read Dr. Seuss and passed out donuts and chocolate milk. So after we graduated, Dick Bass went back to his home of Atlanta, and he very quickly obtained a professorship at Georgia Tech University. He also joined the gospel choir down there, and he sent me a letter, and he said, you know, Billy Stork, we can sing just fine, he and his wife, Kathy, but they had to teach us rhythm. So I moved to Wisconsin to do the dairy veterinarian thing. And on April the 14th, 1999, I got a telephone call that the amazing Dick Bass had died. He was going to the hospital to be with his failing father, and he rear-ended a semi. And our first reaction was get a plane ticket and go to Atlanta, and then we realized that was not the Dick Bass way. So we decided we would have a pilgrimage, and we met at the University of Illinois at Champaign, Illinois, and we went to the IEEE department. We went to the big square gray house where we had sing-alongs, and we went down Green Street where Dick Bass played an impromptu concert one time for a traffic jam. I was driving his pickup truck, and we were moving his piano, and it was gridlock, and people started making requests, so Dick Bass was sitting in the back of his pickup truck playing a concert. We made it to Nashville, Tennessee on Saturday night before the funeral. And this was back when you could just walk into the Bluebird Cafe, and they were doing songwriters in the round, and a guy did a song that he wrote for Garth Brooks and George Strait and Eric Clapton. And finally, there was this young man sitting at the end of our table named Jason Bloom. And Jason did a song that was essentially a paraphrase of that old Footprints prayer. I asked for strength, and you gave me mountains to climb. I asked for grace, and you gave me people in need. He had his back to us. I have no idea how he knew we were there, but when he finished that song, there were 4 of us sitting at the table just crying our eyes out. He nodded to us, and we left that night. So we made it to the parking lot of the Cobb Creek Baptist Church about 9 o'clock that morning, an hour or so before the service. And the parking lot was filling up with Porsches and Mercedes from all the professors that Dick taught with, and pickup trucks from all of his family. And as we walked into the church, the gospel choir that Dick sang with, minus the only 2 white faces in their membership, they sang low and swung slowly. I can't even walk without you holding my hand. Their voices, just a few decibels, but occupied every space that was not otherwise occupied by a person pew or a Bible. And off to the side in the vestibule was a bluegrass gospel outfit that Dick Bass was a part of as well. And they were formed in a semicircle, and at the bottom of that semicircle was a brand new shiny Gibson F5 mandolin with 1 white rose in its tuning pegs. And the guitar player tried to speak. He said, not only have we lost the finest mandolin player we've ever had, one of the finest high tenor vocalists we've ever had, but the man was a spirit. The minute he stepped into our midst, it was like songs that we had been playing forever were brand new. And as a hush started to fill, as a hush came over this massive house of worship, the minister kind of fumbled with some of the ribbons in the Bible for the verses that he was going to read. And the silence was broken by the high honk of air brakes on the curb out front. The doors of the church came open slowly, and in shuffled, they kind of had their hands down by their waist, and they were looking at the floor like prisoners of war. And in came the residents of Atlanta homeless shelters, soup kitchens, the street, the YMCA. And when the minister saw this, God bless this man, when the minister saw this, he came down from the altar and he personally escorted those men and those women into the pews next to us. And I happened to be standing next to the dean of the department that Dick Bass taught with. And I saw him kind of wrinkling his nose and looking around uncomfortably. And I leaned in and I said, Dr. Peters, do you know what Dick Bass does before he comes to school in the morning to teach? He did not. And I said, he serves those men breakfast. So, to live on in the hearts of those you leave behind is not to die. Thank you.
Bill, that was terrific. A baseball player who hits 3 home runs in one game. is a great baseball player. I'm afraid, my friend, you hit 3 home runs there with your stories. Thank you so much. That was really, really great. And I have reread a lot of your snippets out of your books, and the amazing Dick Bass has been reread by me many times. I feel like Dick Bass occupies a very happy place in my mind. He must have been an amazing person. Yeah. Well, this is our time for corporate prayer, and all right, let's, Karen, if you would. Lord, we'd offer our deep felt prayers for all these things that we have cited here, for the healing for those who are ill, and the safe travels for those who are moving about, and the welcome home to heaven of those who have passed away. And we turn our thoughts to Israel, and we want your guidance and help for those folks, and victory against the forces that they're fighting against. You are our Savior and our nurturer and our comforter and our protector. And we'll offer that special prayer that Jesus taught his disciples. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Now, if you would stand, please, we'll sing How Great Thou Art. Just one verse, first verse. is that a joy to just sit up here and listen to that song and those words, How Great Thou Art. I want to mention that Bill has some of his books with him, so that if any of you are interested at all in purchasing some of his books, he has them in his truck outside. So just to let you know they're available, and see Bill after service if you'd like to do that. I'll offer this benediction. O God of creation, you have blessed us with the changing of the seasons. Remind us this week to take time to rest. Remind us this week to behold the wonder of your creation. And remind us this week that it is you who give us the breath of life. Amen.